So, good afternoon, everybody. I hope you're all keeping well in these current lockdown quarantine times. Since the last time that we did this session, which is now pretty much exactly 2 weeks ago, I have done numerous DIY jobs and managed to get a slight more tan by sitting in the garden in between these Zoom calls. And hopefully we got a bit better on Zoom as well, so I'm getting numerous Zooms every day. Bit of housekeeping first before we kind of crack on. The session buttons along the bottom, depending on what you're using, if you're using tablet or PC or smartphone, there should be some buttons that you can see along the bottom. There is an option to raise your hand if you need to ask something specific, but the two methods that we prefer are, there's a chat function if you just want to talk generally to each other or respond to certain things, but there is a Q&A button as well in there. So if you wanted to ask a specific question about, well, last time it was all things furlough and retention schemes and lending. If you want to ask anything specific, then please put it in the Q&A, and then throughout the conversation, I'll make sure that John or Victoria answers that. After this as well, last time we had a couple of unanswered questions, but we'll try and follow up the session with an email and hopefully a video of this to kind of go over some of the key points. So why are we here? Well, today is the second session of Entrepreneurs Club virtual. If any of you have been to any of our live sessions, they usually take place in the old hall. Started them just over a year ago. And what it's really designed to do is it's designed to create a safe space for business owners to look at different elements of business, get better about doing business and do sort of more business together. So with all of the unprecedented climate that we're in at the moment, John and Victoria and I, the founding members, decided to put these sessions on, and it's around the idea of a Q&A. What we sort of got pretty straightforward from the beginning of this was John was getting quite a lot of repeat questions, so was Victoria, and so was I from my clients and our clients. And just generally, we were seeing them out and about there in the LinkedIn and social media world. So we thought actually what we'd do is collect some of those together. We've been asking for questions over the past couple of weeks and sort of put this on as a regular session so people can come here and have a chance to listen to a couple of the key things. Maybe you pick something from there, but if there is something specific, you've got the option to dive in. The session is planned for the next hour. We shouldn't run over. We didn't run over too much last time. And like I say, if we don't get to any questions, we'll try and answer them before. But without further ado, if I could just introduce Jon Davies from Jon Davies Accountants and Victoria Brown from High Performance Consultancy, and myself, Alex.Barnes, or full Sunday name Alexander J. Barnes, if I'm in trouble, from AJ Barnes Financial Planning. So without further ado, if we get on with the Q&A that we've got a few prepared questions that we've been asked over the last couple of weeks. So Victoria, if we could start with you, I think it's sort of a prudent time to look at what changes have been made around the coronavirus retention scheme since your last talk.
Okay, so we're now on the 6th update of the scheme. So that sort of gives you a flavour of how many times we've talked and given advice and then had to sort of amend the advice accordingly. Last time we spoke, we were told obviously that it would end in May, so you could furlough people till the end of May. That's now changed and that's been extended to the end of June, which is really helpful, to be honest, because there'll be a lot of clients, a lot of employers who potentially are a little bit worried and think they may have to make people redundant. What you would hope now is if we do sort of relax the lockdowns shortly and we are able to sort of drip feed people back into the workforce, then maybe we'll be able to save some more jobs along the way. So that was a good move from the government. The other change was the application as well for furlough. So before, the last time we spoke, John and I told you that it was the 28th of February. So as long as your employees were on the payroll from the 28th of February, they would be able to claim furlough. That has been extended now to the 19th of March, which again just allows more people to be able to be covered by furlough if they were not beforehand. So that's been obviously an improvement in the scheme as well for people. And a question that came up quite a lot for us last time, and John and I had a debate, and we couldn't really give you the answer because it was quite grey. It was around holidays. So quite a lot of people asked us last time, if you furlough an employee, can they take holiday during this period of time? And obviously the concern is the longer that we are on lockdown and the longer that we have people sort of furloughed, then they will accrue leave during that period of time, as will everybody that is home working as well. And quite a lot of business owners are looking at this now and thinking, right, well, what I don't want is when we do go back to work to have everybody trying to put in their application for leave when actually we need to hit the ground running. So the new sort of the changes were good. The clarity is now there to say that you can, when somebody is furloughed, you can actually allow them to take leave, but you would have to give them the top up. So if you're only paying somebody at 80%, then during that period of leave, they would have to be topped up to 100%. So there's been a little bit more clarity now since the last time that we spoke.
Okay, and just picking up on that similar sort of thread, I know that there's been a question asked around childcare commitments right now, and sort of how they work and how you manage sort of staff that have got childcare commitments. How's that sort of working?
So again, it was good that we've got a little bit more of an update around childcare, because at the beginning it was quite grey. So the advice we were given from the government was that if you had sort of childcare commitments, that you'd have to take unpaid parental leave, which nobody wants to do. That has now, they have extended furlough to allow people that have childcare commitments actually to be able to be furloughed if necessary. So that is absolutely a consideration. I had a question a couple of weeks ago from a client, and they had 2 members of staff, one of which they needed to furlough one of them. It did exactly the same job, but one of which had childcare commitments, the other didn't. So they decided to furlough the person who had the childcare commitments, because it was far harder for them to do, at sort of 100% within their role. What I would note is that obviously people that are not furloughed, and you do still need them to work, and they have got childcare commitments, I being one of them now, as are all of us with these sorts of children, and I'm now a teacher as well as an MD, which is interesting. You've just got to take that into consideration, haven't you? And I think most of my clients have been very flexible, very open, and had those open and honest conversations with their members of staff, just to try and find sort of a balance between the two. Some people have got weird and wonderful ways of working at the moment. They'll get up, incredibly early to work, and then sort of have a little earlier, and then their partner will work a bit later, and they'll just find a way to sort of to meet the needs. Some clients have done things like taken some holidays as well, so they've used the opportunity to maybe still get some productivity out of their member of staff, but albeit maybe a shorter week, and use some of their leave entitlement that they are accruing during this period of time. So that's great, because that gives you, you get in that work-life balance for the member of staff. You're also using some of that leave. But I think you have got to be fair and reasonable during this period of time, because it is a juggling act, and we're all doing our best, aren't we, during this time?
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you very much. So that brings me on actually quite nicely to this. What I'm finding is there is a work-life sort of blur with sort of working from home and being in lockdown, but then also, John, if I can direct to you, one of sort of the questions that we've received here is, can a furloughed employee or director attend online networking meetings, including BNI? So, while we are all working from home, I think there is a little bit of a mixed message around if somebody is on furlough, whether they can continue this type of activity or whether they should be more expected to stop. So what's your thoughts on that?
Well, I guess I might refer to my HR expert, I'll be honest, on that one. As in generally, because I think I have probably an opinion, but I'm not the expert, because it is one of the most debated topics at the moment of what a director can do, and kind of what's said in the guidance is that they can effectively do their statutory duties. The statutory duties usually include things like the Companies House filings, HMRC filings. There are 7 statutory duties that Companies House also lists, which are a bit kind of wide and woolly. about not having a conflict of interest and what have you. It's not, but it's not really okay. What tasks can you and can't you do other than those statutory filings? So on the face of it, if you are an employee or a director, i.e. anybody who is furloughed and claiming the job retention scheme grant, you shouldn't be doing anything other than those bits and bobs. But I mean, I'd be interested for Victoria's take on things like networking, because to me, common sense says that as the director, do they want you to remain claiming furlough or have a company that goes down the pan, or does common sense say that at least if you're doing a few things to push stuff out, if you're not doing the day-to-day job? But I think as the guidance is, that appears to be the rule, and I'd be interested in Vic's take on it.
So Victoria, is John right?
Oh dear. Yeah, I mean, as you say, John, it's very difficult because the guidance, I think by probably the 10th update to the guidance we'll have clarity on this. But what we've done is we've sort of struck a balance, because one of my concerns, and maybe just move away a little bit from a director and think about an employee now of a business, and we've had some clients that have done things like they've been terrified of exactly this. They've been terrified that their employee will continue to work, maybe bring profit into the business, and as a result of that they will not be able to get their claim for furlough. But they've done things like taking away their laptops, taking away their mobile phones. And my concern there is that actually feels like a punishment to me of the people that have been furloughed in your business. It feels like you've sort of suspended somebody from duty. So what we've done with our clients is obviously provided the paperwork, and that was something that another sort of change that came in recently from the government, to say that you have to have that written documentation now between the employee and the employer to say that you have been furloughed. And keep it for 5 years. So it's interesting to see what they're going to do in terms of investigation moving forwards. But for us, we've put in that, we've sort of outlined in there sort of some of the requirements of furlough. So I think it's trying to strike the balance, isn't it, of actually allowing your employees to be able to do something. So if it is the likes of networking, then yes, if they do attend networking, BNI, for example, has really good training. So you are allowed within the guidance to be able to do training. So there is an argument that technically you could view this networking as a level of training, as long as you don't bring any money into the business and make a profit. But there has been that concern by particularly a lot of people in sales roles, that if they do nothing, to your point, John, for 3 months, then they are going to have to it takes 3 months to build a pipeline, doesn't it? So I think arguably our guidance has been to people, be cautious and and be very careful in what your employees are doing, but equally, if they do want to sort of upskill, or they do want to sort of attend a networking event, if that's more for the future pipeline, then we can't see that as being a problem. It's more at the moment a case of if they are being seen to bring business in now, and you are circumnavigating a scheme to try and make money out of it. But I think it's still not particularly clear. I agree with you, John. It's not, and being a BNI member myself as well, it's difficult because BNI guidance is that you can actually, if you're furloughed, attend BNI. So their stance is quite clear at the moment, that they are encouraging people that are furloughed to still be an active member, and some of which are in sort of some leadership roles, aren't they? So arguably they are volunteering to do that.
I think in my own, so I'm in BNI as well, in our BNI chapter, it has been, the policy has been put out there just the same as everybody else, but I think we're all friends in the same group. So I think we've understood, actually, if somebody doesn't feel comfortable and feels like an investigation might happen in future where they would come back to that and maybe pull that to pieces, then I think that a few people have themselves made the decision to temporarily sort of play it safe, as it were. But the group's been pretty supportive, so that's nice. It's good. Okay, so moving on to a little bit more about pounds and pence and finance and so on and so forth. So, John, direct to you. Question here, very simple. When will I receive my small business grant?
Simple one to ask, Alex. Hard one to answer. I think what we see, so the small business grant is the grant of either £10,000 for small businesses who are eligible for small business rates relief, have a premises with a rateable value under £15,000. There's then a similar grant for the retail and hospitality, which it's if your premises rateable value is less than £15,000, it's the same amount. If it's between 15 and 51,000, you get a £25,000 grant. Now, the claim forms went online for many councils at the end of March. Liverpool was the 30th or 31st of March, and Nosy Mural and the like set were about the same. Some of them around the country aren't live yet. So the councils are quite far apart in terms of where they are in doing this, and also in terms of the claims received. So we have, out of our clients, to my knowledge, and I don't know precisely on all of them, but we've had a handful. We had a few through very, very quickly the first week of April. Then we seem to have a gap, and then we've had 2 or 3 in the last few days, but the vast majority haven't had theirs yet. All of the ones we've had so far have actually been in retail and hospitality. I don't know if that's coincidence, but that is kind of where we are. But the majority of our clients haven't had their grant yet. The idea is it would be paid out within April. And obviously April itself is running out, because the idea is people need the cash. So when, I do not know. What I do is obviously they are working hard. I mean, Joe Anderson was saying last week that he had staff in the whole of the Easter bank holiday weekend processing these grants to try and get the money out. But it is a little bit kind of wait and see. Okay, and just as a follow-up to that, again, probably a simple question, difficult answer, but what are the tax implications of the grant? So people have heard that they'll pay tax on them. What's your view? Ultimately, yes, it is taxable, it's income. And that's the same with all the grants. So they have explicitly said it for the self-employed scheme, which pays 3 months worth of your average profits out and will be paid to self-employed people in June. They explicitly stated on that it will be taxed in your next tax return. But to an extent, unless there are a few exceptions, but pretty much every grant is actually taxable. It's income and goes into your tax return. So I guess you can't claim too much, because if you're getting £10,000 now to pay, if you're limited, it could be 19% corporation tax in whatever they may be in a year from now, because a lot of it is about actually getting cash into your business now to help you through. I'd rather have £8,100 than nothing. So I wouldn't complain about the tax, but yes, it is taxable. And Stuart, Doug Dillare has just put a question on, which is from this morning. He's been on the professional Liverpool Zoom call, and they've said that they paid 48 million out already and returning stuff around really quickly, and had a range of things in place to get it done. So that's quite an interesting. Yeah, I think as an anecdote, with Vicky, your clients, like I said, we've probably got about, I'm not sure how many we've got who are eligible. Best part of 100, we've had about 5 or 6 paid out so far. So it is still a small proportion. Yeah, I found that we've got quite a few clients in Manchester, and they seem to have been paid out quite quickly as well. So I've not compared between the two, but they do seem to be getting their claims turned around quite quickly in all sectors as well. Yeah. Okay, great. And I suppose turning to all of us here as a group. So it's a question here which I think has come in. So what are we finding to be the biggest challenges for employers when staff are working from home? So Vic, what's your thoughts on that? I think at the beginning it was probably just the transition, and I think if you didn't have a home working policy before and you've never worked from home, then obviously that was just a challenge in itself around technology and making sure, because it was for some people that were in denial for quite a long time. They literally went from, I spoke to some clients who thought that lockdown wasn't going to happen on the one day, and then day 2, we were all getting our stuff and leaving the office. And what I'm concerned about now is, and what I'm finding is, mental health is becoming quite a big concern. A lot of, you've seen it no doubt in the media recently,
that has become a real fear that actually mental health and well-being will become arguably a greater killer than the coronavirus, the way if we stay in lockdown for much longer. So we are doing a lot now with clients to actively help them around their communication with their employees. So how are they sort of communicating each day? What are they using? I think we talked about it last time, didn't we? Some of us are using the likes of Teams and Zoom and ways to sort of keep actively in communication with your team at all times. Other things that we're doing as well is obviously those touch points. I think it's really important for everybody, and I can share this later, of just reminding your people of where they can get help if they are starting to struggle a little bit with the isolation. So they are still, again, it's something that has been heavily publicised. There's a lot of support still out there, contrary to, I think, what some people think, that maybe there's not because of COVID. And then the other side of it, we've now got the consideration of what do we do to bring people back and that transition back, because I think the problems that we've had with isolation, we're going to have similar problems moving out of isolation. So that they are things that I would advise everybody now to start to consider when lockdown is sort of removed, or whatever that looks like, whether we still have some level of sort of social distancing, but how we're going to bring people back into the workplace that have been used to being at home. So a lot for us to think about at the moment, but productivity and mental health is probably the biggest concerns that we've got at the moment around home working.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I think that actually it's been a strange, ultimately we are living through a history lesson here, and I think that everybody is trying to figure, there is no template for this about the rights and wrongs of what you should do, because this has been unprecedented. But I think what I've tried to do in the practice is try and keep things as normal as possible to a degree. So anybody who's still working from home, checking in regularly with them, and sort of even just small things, sort of like we sent out last weekend just like a little perk box of like a bar, and then like a few coffees and a few other bits and pieces, just so people could be at home and still have a brew together almost, and set up a Zoom in to discuss figures. But I feel like the conversation has started to change, because that first couple of weeks we're very much going into lockdown and trying to figure out what that looks like. I hadn't really heard of Zoom 6 weeks ago or something like that, and now it's every waking day of my life. But now the conversation's changing more to that, there's light at the end of the tunnel. How do we transform businesses, and what does that happen? So John, what's happening within Jon Davies Accountants for you and staff, and how are you working things at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, I guess similarly, we have a morning team meeting when we're in the office, and we have a morning team meeting now when we're not in the office. Obviously, it's done by video call now. We've been using Zoom for a couple of years at least, but usually for people, clients who are a long way away. Now we're using it for clients who are a few hundred yards away. But for the team, it's obviously it's not the same as being together, but it does at least have that interaction and brings everyone together at the start of the day. It's probably a longer team meeting than it would be in the office, because it has a bit more chit chat, because you don't get that throughout the day. There's a WhatsApp group for the social chit chat, and what have you, pictures of your cat, dog, what you're having for tea, that kind of thing. I think the impact though is because we're all set up to work remotely, and then we've got cloud software, laptops, what have you. Anyway, it's when you're all doing it at once, it isn't as efficient. You can't. It's that thing of just sticking your head up and asking for help. And we had 2 new starters on like the 1st or 2nd of March as well. So for them, feeling part of the team is hard, when you've only been in the office for, not even 3 weeks when we went into lockdown, but also in terms of training them as well, it is more difficult when the onus falls on one person all the time, because if, a bit stuck on some silly little thing on software, you can't say, can anybody help? It has to be, I'm going to ring a specific person. So I think, it's not quite as efficient. However, there are also some advantages as well, in terms of there are less disturbances, and pausing and thinking about meetings. Meetings last a little shorter as well, I think, because I mean, certainly you've got the travel thing you've saved on, which is great, but some of the meetings are actually more efficient. I think just some of the working isn't quite as efficient overall, though. It swings and roundabouts, and it's working. But I think everyone is looking forward to being back in the office in one way or another for the interaction.
Yeah, and I think that actually that sort of change in rhetoric towards forward-looking instead, and sort of what's going to happen in future. There's a question here which has come up really, which is a more financial question. Is if a recession hits, how long are we likely to see effects of this, and how does this affect things generally? So, this is a question that I've had quite a lot actually, because obviously it impacts quite a lot. But the two things that I would generally separate out are your life, the economy, and the market. So those three things are three very distinct pillars when we're discussing this. But the two which often get thrown together are the economy and the financial market. So when people are looking at sort of potentially turning that corner at some point in the future, at the moment, obviously, we are still very much in the eye of the storm here. So it's very hard to look at what's going to happen. But what's usually pays dividends in this area is sort of to look back over history. So history does not repeat itself, but it rhymes. So that's the adage that we use at the moment. So to share a chart with you, this is sort of some major indices that we've looked at. So it's the DataStream UK index, and what it looks at is it goes back over the past 40 years, and it has a look at where was the market, DataStream 1, 3 and 5 years, a year later, 3 years later, and then 5 years later. So you can see there the year is in the blue, the green is 3 years later, the light blue is 5 years later. So absolutely that while we're in this period, it's very scary. People get sort of very worried about it, particularly with the 24-hour news stream that we're getting all the time. But it's worth looking at the moment, what we have experienced in comparison to the last sort of financial crash, which was 2008, 2009. So far, the impacts have actually been not massive in terms of the financial markets, but that is hugely down to the liquidity volume which has been pumped in by central governments and banks. So to give you an idea, the worst of the volatility that I've seen this year was probably a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks, in terms of a financial market impact. If you were to go back to 2008, if anybody remembers that far back and looks at how long the impacts were felt, it was probably the best part of 5.5 months, and they were much heavier than where they are now. We were taking some really rocking blows on certain days, which is all around this Northern Rock February 08 kind of time. So ultimately scary, yes, but patterns do emerge out of this type of thing, and people's health and well-being is the number one thing. But at the moment, what we're finding is that most analysts are saying that Q2 and Q3 of this year, a recession now is baked into the numbers of the market, and potentially moving into Q4. And if then obviously it extends into Q1 and Q2 next year, then we would expect to see another correction in the markets as a whole. But that's sort of a bit of an update on how things are seen from our lens. And staying with the idea of finance, actually, one thing which a lot of my clients have mentioned, and I know, John, we've spoken about this before, is the coronavirus loans. So the CBILS, or SIBILs, as I heard it called the other day, Civil for hours. And the question is, how long will it take to get a coronavirus loan, and what information do I have to give? So perhaps a bit for both of you there. What's your thoughts?
I think in terms of the time, I mean, there is a backlog. I mean, there's been a lot of criticism about the speed of getting these things out. I think at the weekend, about 6,000 loans had been approved and gone through out of 300,000 applications or something. And the vast bulk that have been approved are from NatWest and RBS, because we kind of own them, so they're morally obliged to do it quite quickly. I actually got a meeting later today a board meeting of a client for the boards to sign off on us borrowing, because we're approved. We've got £750,000 on and actually one of the things, actually the interest rates and what we're seeing, that those are coming through the banks, that they are at good rates. So this one is at 2.83%, and we have no capital or interest repayments in year one, so we don't pay back anything in year one, and then we pay it back in over 2 years after that. So it's a very attractive rate. That is from NatWest, and that's been approved, relatively quickly. We're 3 weeks, 4 weeks after the scheme was launched. I have a lot of clients who I guess are in the queue. The good thing is, because we have contacts with some of the banks, we've been able to help and actually get them to speak to a real person. Because the starting point with most is putting expression of interest in, but then the bank to get back to you to start the process. And they're drafting in. I mean, I suppose quite a few people who work at the banks, and again, over the bank holiday weekend, lots of them are in effect just ringing back people with expression of interest to then start the loan application. One bank manager told me that it then takes him 3 to 4 hours to process each application. He personally had 40 that he had to process, which is therefore 3 or 4 weeks worth of work. So there is it's certainly not been as quick as obviously they'd hoped in the first place. I think the banks are struggling in terms of resource. Generally speaking, they're not taking applications from anyone who isn't a current customer, because they don't have the resource to do so. As normally, this is a good way of them usually getting business is through a loan. They have to look after their own first because of that resource. So it's not quick, but they are happening and things are moving. And of course, things in the background, they're bringing more resource to try and get stuff moving quickly. And in terms of things such as the information, generally speaking, I suppose, in terms of what they'll loan is, they're only really looking to lend money that genuinely is to cover what you've lost due to coronavirus. So they're not lending for you to buy plant machinery, assets, marketing, or what have you. It is supposed to be what you have lost. And therefore, they are generally asking for cash flows to show the impact. Now, the thing with the cash flow is quite difficult. Right now, nobody really knows the impact, but as long as they're sound and solid assumptions, they're looking for accounts and potentially management accounts prior to the crisis to see that you were a viable business. Because, of course, while the banks are still on the hook for 20% of these loans, they don't want to lend to effectively business failing anyway. It should be a viable business that is only currently struggling due to coronavirus. They want to be viable beforehand, and in the cash flow to show the dip, what you need, and therefore how you'll come out of it and you'll be viable afterwards. Generally, they're asking as well things like, I think that we filled in basically to confirm that, for example, you've already gone to you've covered every other source of government support. So you have either you've furloughed staff and claimed through that, you've claimed your small business grant, etc., i.e. the loan is the last resort. So there's quite a lot of information to fill in, but actually when you actually read the questions, there's a lot of them, but they're relatively simple to answer. We had one the other day where ultimately most of the questions were pretty much one sentence answers because it was pretty clear. The cash flow wasn't the most sophisticated of cash flows because that top line of the income was it's up in the air now. When we don't even know when we're coming out of lockdown, it's hard to be clear on the impact of this. One the other day was in hospitality as well, and it's likely that hospitality venues won't be open until late summer perhaps. So if you were looking for one, it's as much as anything is, start the process sooner rather than later, because it will take a little while. But if you follow it through and you can answer the questions and put the application in, speak to your bank manager or what have you, is that the rates that are coming through certain high street banks are very attractive rates, and no matter what, you don't pay interest in year one anyway. That's funded by the government, but the rates are, obviously the base interest rate is as low as it's ever been. The rates on the loans are actually are very good rates.
And you might have answered this already, John. Forgive me if I missed it, but I've heard this as well. The questions come in specifically around PGs or personal guarantees on loans under 250,000. Does this apply still on CBILS or any other business loans? What's the score there at the moment?
Yes. So any CBILS loan of less than £250,000, there is no personal guarantee required. That was one of the things early on, that a lot of the banks were asking for personal guarantees, and the Chancellor stepped in, and that was removed to perhaps 3 weeks ago now. If it's above £250,000, there will be a personal guarantee required. However, it will not include your main residential home, so that would be safe anyway. Generally speaking, the banks, if you do go to the bank for a loan, the starting point is, if you are a very safe bet anyway, is to use a standard loan. So they all have slightly different rules, but generally, if you want less than £25,000, they push you to a standard product. If the business has security, i.e. tangible security, of building or plant and machinery or something, they would probably look to a standard product anyway. The CBILS is supposed to be for those who would not be lent to, or need an amount bigger than they can normally borrow. That's where you get to the CBILS. But what they're doing is they're offering quite attractive rates on the standard loans as well. So it's not a case of I have to appear bad to get the CBILS loan and get a good rate. They are trying to align the rates across the standard products as well. In terms of the guarantees, yeah, less than £250,000, there is no need for personal guarantee. Over £250,000, there will be a personal guarantee, but it wouldn't include your kind of main residence.
Okay, thanks for that. So, looking at the furlough scheme and moving on to that a little bit more specifically. So, I'm turning to you here, Victoria, as our expert panelist. The question that's come in around the job retention scheme is a couple really. So what level of contact can you have with your team when they're furloughed? And one that I'm interested as well, I've heard a few things about alternating furloughed employees, so sort of switching and matching that in. So what's your thoughts on that?
Okay, well, I think we kind of touched upon the contact before a little bit, didn't we? So I think that to the point that we made before, in terms of your employee, when they're furloughed, cannot work for you. It's a little bit strange, because they can't work for you, but they could actually go and get a job somewhere else and work for someone else during that time with your consent. They can't be seen to make a profit for you, but they can do training and they can volunteer. So in terms of contact, a lot of my clients are, as I mentioned before, this isn't a punishment to people. This is something that a lot of people are doing to just try and retain their staff during this period of time. So that communication is very important. A lot of clients, we really are encouraging them to make sure that they do use the likes of Zoom, the likes of Teams, and include them. So, if you're doing, say, a weekly quiz, which a lot of people seem to be doing at the moment, make sure you include the furloughed staff. It's also important for them to have the business updates as well. So 3 months is a long time. A lot can happen during that 3 months. So you don't want to parachute people back into your business. You don't want them to feel like they've done anything wrong. You need to ensure that they are clear on what's going on within the business. And there's nothing wrong with doing that. It's just that you can't directly instruct them to do any work. We did mention, I think, on the last call that we had, just to be a little bit careful as well around training. So if a member of your staff does want to train whilst they're furloughed, you just need to be a little bit careful around national minimum wage as well. So if they are being paid at 80% and they are on a training day for a day, they could arguably fall below national minimum wage. So that's where you need to speak to your accountant, just to be safe that you don't breach any wages or any sort of national minimum wage laws. And then to the other point there, Alex, just around furlough and rotation, a lot of people are doing this actually, because originally when furlough came in, I think some clients were a little bit concerned about sort of offering that to some people and offering them furlough, because it was for most people it was sort of an 80% reduction because a lot of people couldn't afford to top it up. But I think what they found was because their staff were not actually spending as much money, so some of them are taking the opportunity to have sort of the deferment on their mortgage for 3 months, and then they're not going out and sort of spending the money that they would normally spend. I'm certainly not. That they were seeing that as a holiday, so other employees were getting a little bit frustrated, thinking, well, you know, I'm not getting paid to be at home. So this is where we didn't really expect this sort of challenge to come in. So some employers have been alternating. The caveat to that is they must make sure that the person has been furloughed for at least 3 weeks, so they wouldn't be able to claim for that person on furlough if they didn't have 3 consecutive weeks that they were furloughed for. So my advice would be, if you're going to do that, then by all means you can, but it just needs to be on a 3-week rotation. And it's been quite effective for some of my clients.
Yeah, it makes sense. I think the issue of holidays is one that we've been asked about as well, in terms of how does that work. There's a specific question here, but it'll probably help if we address this and then sort of talk a little bit more widely about holidays and how we're sort of addressing that. I know we've touched on it, but it says here, if one of my employees was on paid annual leave as of the 1st of March, can I claim grant for him from the 1st of March if I furloughed him from the 1st of March? Since he was on annual paid leave, he wasn't doing any work anyway, and as far as I know, it is allowed for employees to be furloughed and be on annual leave holiday at the same time. So am I allowed to claim from him from the 1st of March for March pay period? What's our thoughts?
Do you want me to answer first, or John?
You can argue over that one, because I was just reading March a lot.
Well, I suppose I can draw upon some of our experiences. So obviously the sort of Chancellor announced furlough around, was it around the 19th, John? Around that time, wasn't it, that he announced? Yeah. So a lot of our clients had already sort of closed their businesses, you know, particularly if they were in sort of leisure, retail. They've been forced to close the doors earlier than this. So they were in a time where they didn't have this option. They were looking at things like layoff clauses in their contracts, and some of them did actually use annual leave. So the argument there was, well, they've already accrued this. So whilst we don't really know what's going to happen, but we can get any sort of grants or any loans coming into the business, let's get people to take either paid or unpaid leave. So if that was the situation, then my answer would be yes, because that person, particularly now that we've got the clarity around annual leave, you know, we've been advised now that you can actually be on annual leave when you're furloughed, as long as you do top up that period of time. Then most people did have to backdate their letters and their anyway, because you know that they sort of, it's not announced until around the 19th of March, and people have been able to claim from the 1st of March, but would not have been able to, you know, you have to be clear and ensure that you can demonstrate that they didn't work during that period of time.
John, have you got anything to add on that one?
I agree.
Me too, if that helps. Me too. Just sticking with furlough for a second, we've got sort of 12 minutes left, so we'll get this and then a couple of other ones I've got down here. So all things furlough, very popular questions. So can a director who is furloughed as an employee explain whilst on furlough to a client why they can't do a project? So if there's an overlap period and the project is due to go ahead, but then this person has furloughed themselves and then they still need to explain to that client. What's your thoughts there? Both.
That's definitely John first, that one.
To me, I guess it comes back to this common sense thing, is that they shouldn't be working. But if it's, so is this a current client wanted an update on a project or something? But I guess whether it's a current client or prospect, I suppose it's probably the same. Common sense says to answer the email to say that actually we're closed for the moment and we'll be back on the 1st of June, whatever the date may be, would seem very, very harsh if that were to invalidate a furlough. as in, are you generally supposed to just ignore the emails and what have you? And I said, this is back to this whole debate, grey area about that thing of employees and particularly directors of what they can or can't do, and particularly if you are the sole director or potentially the only director stroke employee of a company. So I would have thought that responding to a query like that, to say we're actually closed at the moment, can we look at doing the project in June, July, whatever the date may be, shouldn't invalidate a furlough.
No, I agree, absolutely. I think, and what you've got to consider at the moment is, normally if we have a change in legislation, it takes years, years of consultation and consideration before it becomes a change. This is unprecedented times, and this is something that the government have had to react to very quickly. And so you will find with some of these schemes they're not particularly well thought out, and there's things that they've not considered, but it's about being fair and reasonable. And one thing that the government absolutely want to do is ensure that they can improve the economy again, don't they? So I think as long as they're trying to prevent people from taking advantage of the scheme, and we all know that would happen if they didn't have some measures in place. But I think it would be, as Jon says, extremely unfair to invalidate something in that respect, because arguably all you're doing is sort of kicking the ball down the road, aren't you? You're kicking the problem down the road. So if people don't respond now, employees don't necessarily sort of consider their pipeline for June, then we're going to have businesses go pop and redundancies later on in the year as a consequence of this. So it's all about, common sense needs to prevail in circumstances.
Right. And then we've had a question from Stuart here, which came in this week. So Stuart says, in my mind, the glass is half full. If you watch the news and the depressing same again questions from the journalists, you'd think the world was coming to an end, and the glass is definitely half empty. So are the panel aware of any new businesses that are starting/setting up specifically because of COVID-19 and the opportunity it presents? So a bit for all of us, really. So if I start, I suppose it's not sort of new businesses, but what I have been quite impressed with is businesses changing tact and being quite innovative with the way that they're looking at things. So cleaning businesses, changing all of a sudden the way that they're looking at this, and there's quite a big opportunity for them into sort of the hygiene area. And I think that one of the economic updates that we had this week was just how people's spending habits will probably change very quickly, whereas normally it takes a few years for public spending habits to change. I think that they will change much quicker. So a change to more like greener cars, hygiene, health, that type of thing. Even down to a friend's dad who is a plumber that I know, is obviously can't work from home, but he started making lamps, which are sort of industrial piping with a lamp in the end of it and the wire going through it. And they're really good, but that kind of, bars that are selling T-shirts and jumpers and doing sort of home delivery type of things, I'm not aware of specifically myself businesses opening up because of this, but I'm definitely aware of people being fleet of foot and moving and adapting quite quickly. But what about you, Go? I'm interested to hear you as well.
Yes, similarly, I don't think we've had one who's come to us who has started up specifically off the back of this. But I guess with anything, there are some businesses that end up doing quite well out of it. Some, he's a friend ultimately who I know, it's from the other side of the country, who has two businesses. One sells jigsaw accessories, and the other one does a website for home learning. So, suddenly, those two are doing very well at the moment. We have other businesses. We have one that puts printing onto kind of bottles, and they've got a big order ultimately to put the kind of measurements onto medical supplies, because ultimately it's the same process. So again, it's something that kind of came out of nowhere in a way, because that's not what they've been doing to date. It's been, let's say, printing onto bottles predominantly, but actually that's the equipment they have and the technology they have can be used for something different for the NHS. So there will always be some businesses who ends up either by luck like the jigsaw guy, or by actually, as you said, being fleet of foot or just kind of tweaking slightly what they do, that actually, you know, there will always be business to be done no matter what.
Yeah, I'm the same really. I'm not aware of sort of, I haven't got any new clients that have just set up, but one of my clients produces hand sanitizers. So as you can imagine, they've had record sales. And it's difficult, isn't it? Because to the point of the question really, because they, on one hand, are delighted by the sales, but in horrendous circumstances have they been successful. So that can be quite difficult, I think, for people to celebrate the success right now through some of the real sort of upset and misery that this has brought. I do have other clients again who've been innovative, and I love to see that entrepreneurial flair at times like this. So I've got sort of like gyms that have moved to sort of like virtual PT lessons, which I think, because they can be so lucrative, they'll probably still keep an element of that when we do go back to the gym again. I have other clients that sort of have tool hire, so they've rocketed in sales because everybody's sort of doing DIY right now. So it's been interesting to see. I think it's as leaders, it certainly does demonstrate the entrepreneurs and, you know, who can sort of adapt to these times, and the people that have been quite shocked actually, those of which you've not really adapted very well and have sort of been a little bit like rabbit in headlights. And you know, we will be remembered for how we've reacted during this time by, you know, our peers and also the people that work for us as well. So I think it's those that have shone will continue to shine afterwards.
I completely echo that. I think that's spot on. I was on a call yesterday with Professional Liverpool, and I think that it's very easy for us business owners and business-minded people to get sort of down a rabbit hole of business first and sort of, you know, opportunities and things like that. But ultimately, there's a real human cost to this, and I think that remaining sensitive and acting as a good neighbour, I call it, throughout this period, we'll see you reap dividends in the long run anyway, because people will definitely remember who was on the correct front foot versus the incorrect front foot. So with just a few minutes to go, I'll just wrap up with sort of a general question for everybody. If there's any questions here, there are quite a few questions which I've not managed to answer or get to. We'll try and answer these separately afterwards. But one thing which I've definitely realised is how much time previous to this I was spending sitting in traffic on the motorway, and how perhaps inefficient my day was, even though I thought I was the most efficient person in the world. And the question here is, will this time set a precedent for future home working? Now that people have worked from home, will it be difficult to revert back to 100% office working? I know my own thoughts, but what's your thoughts on it? So Victoria, over to you. What's your thoughts on that for you and your team?
Well, I can see it already, to be honest, because I can see people thinking, right, you know, that potentially we are going to sort of be back in work over the next couple of months. And, you know, there's a real mix within my office. Some of my team absolutely love being at home and enjoy that work-life balance. And to your point, I think particularly the people in my team who travel a lot, so spend a lot of time on the train from Liverpool to Manchester and stuck in traffic, just that, you know, couple of hours a day to be able to spend with their family has been very important. I have quite a lot of clients who've been very against home working in the past. And don't get me wrong, you know, there's some businesses that absolutely cannot work from home. It's just not at all possible. But for many, it's been more a concern around productivity and inability to maybe embrace technology the way they should have. So this has been a really interesting time where sometimes I've been sort of up against it, sometimes with some employers around the benefits of home working. So I'm hoping that it will open their eyes a little bit to the fact that, you know, if you have the right balance, we can have very highly engaged, productive, high-performing teams by doing a bit of both. So I know from a personal perspective, I'm going to review our home working policy. So we've always been able to work from home, but we've never been sort of it's been as and when it's needed, whereas I think what we're going to do is maybe look at, well, actually, you know, maybe you can take a couple of days a month where you just want to work from home. You don't need to give me a reason for it. It can just be you're taking that day to work from home and not have to, you know, fight the traffic. So I think a lot of my clients are also very similar. They're going to try and find a balance between the two moving forwards and embrace home working a little bit more.
And John, what do you think to wrap up?
Yeah, I think similar. I think it's finding that balance. We have, as an example, one of the team was working one day from home every week, because that kind of suited with the kids and what have you. One of the others been talking about doing that, and I said yes, great. One of my new starters on the 1st of March actually left me 3 years ago because of the commute. Has now come back. She said we could be flexible over the time she comes in, and potentially once she's settled in, let her. We didn't expect she would work from home 3 weeks in fully, but the idea would be once she's settled in, again, she can work from home, say a day a week. We have a couple who work slightly different hours to avoid any commute, either come in early or late. And I think it's that flexibility really and balance. You still can't beat actually being together at some, you know, for some of the time for efficiency and the kind of team spirits and what have you, but letting people work from home some of the time, it is great. You know, I've been doing it for 20 years. When my boss spotted, or it suddenly occurred to him how much I was spending on the trains, because I worked in Manchester for years, I said, why don't you work from home about a day a week? And it was great. A day of just getting my head down, very few interruptions, getting lots done. More than a day, sometimes you're craving company. So it's balance.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I think that everybody will return to a natural level of working. If that's, I think it would be very, very unlikely in my role that this will continue at 100% remote. It would just be impossible. But actually, is there a space for this to increase capacity, and does it suit a need for certain clients? Absolutely. So just having that sort of adaptable approach, flexible approach, that I think is going to be really useful. But we have now reached our hour marker. So I apologise to anybody who sent in a question we've not managed to get to it, but I hope that's been useful. And the aim of these sessions is really to reach out to the business community around us and just try and offer any support that we can. That we're fellow business owners just like yourselves. And if there is anything that we can do to support, then please keep an eye on our social media channels. I know we're all on LinkedIn and other social media. We will try and hold another one of these sessions again at a regular point in a couple of weeks. And I will try and send out an email in the next couple of days summarising what we discussed, a link to the video that we've recorded if you want to watch it back or share it, and so many questions that we've not managed to get to. But I hope you found that useful, and thanks very much for everyone for attending. So I will let you all go there now.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.